In this next episode of this series on strategy execution, we're looking at the human cost of change as we unpack the exhaustion signal. You've got the strategy moving, the milestones are landing, the cross-functional teams are starting to coordinate, and yet your best people are starting to look exhausted. Is this just the price of transformation? Is pushing harder going to make it worse? And what's the single most powerful thing that you can do as a leader to protect your team's ability to deliver? From systemic burnout to energy efficiency, welcome to your next leadership journey with the Hive. So by now, if you've been following this series, you've built something real. You've mapped the stakeholder trajectories. You've lit the campfires. You've got cross-functional teams coordinating around shared milestones. And the moment execution starts working, now this is the moment when coordination is real and the milestones are landing, that's also the moment that your people are most at risk of running out of road. Now, this is not because the strategy is wrong, it's not because the team is weak. This is because they've been carrying the weight of change on top of a full operational load. And that has a cost that most leaders don't really see until it's already done its damage. Now, if you're watching this, you've probably already seen these type of signals before. The energy in the room changes, people who were engaged suddenly go quiet, and the conversations that used to be open are getting, careful. The team that was moving together is now starting to fragment at the edges. That is the exhaustion signal. And if you misread it, you're going to make it worse. And I mean a lot worse. Now in this episode, I'm going to show you three things. First, what the exhaustion signal actually is. And it's not what most of us think as leaders. Second, what exhaustion does to your team's ability to coordinate while under pressure. And third, practical tools, things that you can use this week to restore the collective energy that your strategy rollout depends on. Now, many moons ago now, a great insight was shared with me from Jenifer Toksvig, who is a lyricist and also a huge DEI advocate in the performing arts space. And she shared with me this perspective about understanding energy that radically shifted my perception of what's going on in organizations when we lead through change. In 2003, Christina Miserandino wrote an essay that gave language to something that most leaders have really never been able to articulate. She described human energy as a finite daily supply of spoons. You never know how many spoons you're going to start the day with, but every task costs a spoon. Every decision costs a spoon. Every moment of uncertainty costs a spoon. Every emotionally difficult conversation, every moment of navigating political tension, every time you absorb someone else's frustration without reacting, those cost spoons too. Now, most people start the day with enough spoons to get through their normal operational load, just about. But chances are your team isn't starting the day like that. They're starting the day already at a huge deficit of spoons. And when the spoons are gone, the person in front of you isn't resistant or disengaged. They are genuinely out of capacity. And asking them to push harder at that point isn't demanding more effort. It's spending the last spoons that they have. And that's going to have a knock-on effect for tomorrow. So spoons are units of energy. The exhaustion signal isn't about effort, it's about capacity. When you see your team going quiet or getting careful or fragmenting at the edges, that's not resistance, that's the spoons running out. And spoons run out for, in change, three reasons. You're asking people to do more than the system can carry. You're asking them to navigate change while doing everything they were already doing. or the emotional environment is so depleted that every interaction costs more than it gives back. Usually it's all three at once, and this is the major contributor to your exhaustion signal. And the moment you misread it as a performance problem or an attitude problem, and you respond with pressure, then you spend the last spoons that anybody has in reserve. So what's costing us all this energy? Well, William Bridges, who you may remember we met in episode 2, showed us that the internal transition between change has 3 stages: an ending of what was before, a neutral zone, a crossover point, and this new beginning. Now your team is in the neutral zone, and the neutral zone is a dual burden because the old way hasn't fully gone and the new way hasn't fully arrived. So your people are trying to do both. They're trying to run the old system while learning the new one. They're trying to, if you like, hold on to the old branch while reaching out for the new one and not yet trusting that it's safe to let go. Now, the Job Demands Resources model, or JDR, developed by Demirauti and Bakker, is precise about what follows on. When demands are excessive and sustained without adequate resources, capacity becomes overwhelmed. So sustained strain without relief, we know where that goes, right? It produces burnout. Now, this is the stress point. It's not the launch. It's not the difficult conversations that start at the beginning of that transition. It's the moment that the change starts to stick, when the new way is real enough to require full commitment, but it's not yet established enough to feel safe. And that's when your best people are most at risk. So the neutral zone is where your energy spoons disappear fastest, because people aren't doing one job or the other. They're doing both, and nobody's told them clearly enough what they're allowed to stop. That ambiguity doesn't just cost energy, it costs trust. And a team losing trust in that transition is a team that is losing its ability to coordinate across those boundaries. And without that, your strategy is doomed to failure. The evidence on this is consistent across multiple bodies of research. So Gartner tracked willingness to support organizations through change over 6 years, and it dropped from roughly 3/4 of employees fully supportive of that change to the low 40%. While change volume that we had to experience as employees increased 5-fold. Now, in episode 2, we showed you the burnout to resilience model. What happens when values and actions and purpose fall out of alignment. Now, Christina Maslach's decades of research gives that model its clinical foundation. Because burnout, she found, isn't a personal failing. It's what happens when the environment chronically asks people to operate in ways that conflict with what they value, with what they believe they are capable of, and why they're there. If you've experienced those tensions, you'll know how fast that can drain you, but how determined you are to keep on going, because you don't want to let everybody down and you don't want to fail. The symptoms of exhaustion, cynicism, a kind of reduced sense of personal efficacy. I can't do this the way that I thought I could. You know that feeling? These aren't character flaws. They're the predictable result of a sustained mismatch between person and work. And a strategy rollout, almost by definition, creates several of those mismatches simultaneously. There was a study tracking 28,000 adults across 166 countries. It's a huge piece of research. And they found that global emotional intelligence, the scores of that EQ, declined significantly across all 8 core EQ competencies over a 5-year period. Now, the researchers called this an emotional recession, a sustained global decline in the relational capacities that people need, well, the ones they need most to navigate exactly this kind of pressure of change. And there was a meta-analysis of 59 studies covering over 16,000 participants, and this confirming this relationship that higher emotional intelligence is significantly associated with lower burnout. So lower EQ correlates with higher burnout frequency. Now, your team isn't starting this transition from a neutral baseline. They are starting from a depleted one. The change pressure, the pace, the accumulated uncertainty, all of that's drawn down the collective emotional resource that your team needs right now. And without intervention, well, that depletion is going to become a spiral that your rollout cannot survive. You know, I first came across this concept of above and below the line in the conscious leadership work. Now, this is the idea that at any given moment, we're operating in one of two fundamentally different modes. So if above the line is all about conscious leadership, you know, we're in full awareness of what we're doing and why. We can hold complexity, we consider perspectives beyond our own, we ask before we react. We look for solutions that work for everyone. It's the state where, well, collective intelligence operates, really. And it's where cross-functional coordination becomes possible. Now, below the line, this is reactive leadership. So we're no longer fully conscious of our responses here. We're being driven by reactions. We stop thinking collectively, we start thinking protectively. Now, the authors of conscious leadership call it being closed, defended, and committed to being right. You know that state? In that state, the drama triangle takes over. Now, going below the line isn't only about running out of spoons. We can have plenty of energy and still react badly. We can still get defensive. We can still slip into the villain role or the victim role or the hero role that makes up that drama triangle when something triggers us. Now, this line isn't a resource threshold. This is a consciousness threshold. This is a mood state. But what the spoons do is lower that threshold dramatically. When we're depleted, when the dual burden's heaviest, when the accumulated uncertainty of change has been grinding for months, it takes far less for us to slip below the line. Now, the triggers we'd normally absorb, well, they become the triggers that we react to. And once a team is collectively below the line, that drama triangle doesn't just affect individual conversations. It shapes the entire emotional environment of your rollout. Remember, tired people are reactive people, and reactive people cannot sustain the above-the-line coordination that your strategy depends on. So let's look at these 3 roles in the drama triangle, because I think they're a great indicator of a bit of a self-check as to where you are and a flag as to whether or not you've slipped below the line. Now, Stephen Karpman identified these 3 roles, and these are the roles that, remember, depleted people are going to unconsciously slip into under pressure, including you. So the villain. First of all, this is the blaming, criticizing, demanding. This is someone finding fault before finding solutions, and often very justified in being right? The victim, helpless, overwhelmed, deflecting. You know, there's nothing I can do about this. This is happening to me. There's nothing I can do. And the hero, this is someone who is taking over. They're rescuing. They're solving for others. They're creating, dependency on them rather than capability in others. You know, the hero is so often a role that leaders slip into because they see a problem come up and instantly they want to blame someone for creating this problem for somebody else, and then they step in to try and make it all right, immediately disempowering the person whose responsibility it was to create an environment where they can work effectively. So none of these roles really feel like what they are. You know, the villain thinks they're holding standards. The victim thinks they're being, realistic. And the hero thinks they're being helpful. But all three drain energy. They destroy trust. And they make cross-functional coordination almost impossible. Now, the shift out of the drama triangle, it doesn't happen automatically. But it does become possible the moment that someone in the room chooses to operate from the empowerment triangle instead. This is when the villain becomes the challenger, naming the problem clearly and directly without blame and inviting a solution. The victim becomes the creator, acknowledging the constraint, then asking, what's within their control and how can we move forward with it? And the hero becomes the coach, stepping back from solving and instead asking the questions that help others find their own answers. Now, these aren't personality upgrades, right? These are conscious choices, and they're exactly the choices that become harder to make when the spoons are running low. Which is why the leader modeling them first, consistently, under pressure, matters so much. The drama triangle doesn't announce itself. It just quietly takes over when your energy runs low. The villain, the victim, the hero, these roles that feel entirely justified from the inside and cost everyone around them everything they've got left. And the only way out is a conscious choice. You have to shift into challenger, creator, coach. Someone in the room has to go first. And that someone, as a leader of a strategic rollout, is you. Research on organizational change and burnout found that supervisor support directly buffered the negative relationship between change stressors and both exhaustion and cynicism. And job control, a sense of autonomy and influence over how your work gets done, moderated the relationship between change pressure and that sense of professional efficacy. So job control, I think, is a really valuable perspective to bring in here because it connects directly to the values, action, purpose model from episode 2, that burnout to resilience. When people can see how their actions fulfill their values and serve a purpose that they care about, they experience efficacy even through change. They get it. What they're doing connects to what we're all trying to do. And the change feels like something, that they're navigating. When that alignment breaks, that professional efficacy drops, and that is followed by cynicism. So it all pins on that supervisor support and bringing those values, actions, purpose into alignment. So what does supervisor support actually look like? What we're trying to do is create an environment where collective emotional intelligence can operate. Now, EQ doesn't disappear under pressure. It gets suppressed by the new environment, by whether it feels safe to name what you've been actually feeling. So in a low trust, high pressure, drama triangle environment, the rational response is to armor up, right? Because honesty feels dangerous. But when a leader models above the line behavior consistently, when naming emotional states is treated as intelligence that we can share rather than a weakness, when they operate from a challenger, creator, or coach, they restore the conditions under which everyone's EQ can operate. The research on what that produces is striking. Across 28,000 adults, individuals with higher EQ were over 10 times more likely to report strong outcomes across effectiveness, relationships, quality of life, and well-being. Now, these are life outcomes, right? They're not purely business metrics. But high EQ produces the conditions that make everything else work, well, better. Better relationships across silos, greater effectiveness in cross-functional coordination. It's more energy spoons at the start of the day. Your job at this stage of the rollout is to create the emotionally intelligent environment that gives your team the best chance of staying above the line when the pressure is highest. 10 times more likely to report strong outcomes across effectiveness, relationships, quality of life, and well-being. That's what higher emotional intelligence produces. So across 28,000 people, 166 countries, 5 years of data, your team's collective EQ is not a culture metric, it's an execution variable. And the leader is the single biggest influence on whether it rises or falls under pressure. When the Ryder Cup came to Gleneagles Hotel in Scotland, the leadership team saw it as a prime opportunity. They had over 1,000 staff, one of the leading hotels of the world, and the global audience was watching. Now, I was invited to work with every team member over 6 months to bring the spirit of Gleneagles to life across every role, every team, every guest interaction. And the aspiration that this leadership team had was extraordinary. They wanted every guest to feel personally known and genuinely cared for by every member of staff that they encountered. And they were doing it, well, without clever technology. There was no magic room key that pulled up your preferences. It was just people calling ahead, giving an advance warning. Mr. Tilling's just arriving, he likes a decaf cappuccino, and he's had a long journey, so let's make this experience for him from this moment exceptional. Little moments like that making a huge difference on your experience as you stroll on down to breakfast. Now, if you go above and beyond long enough like that, gradually between different departments, the favour bank is going to start running dry. Creating that level of personalised experience across housekeeping, maintenance, room service, concierge, the restaurants, the business teams, that requires constant cross-departmental coordination. So teams calling in requests, asking for exceptions, creating special moments that required somebody else to do something extra. So over time, well, communication tends to slip. The context gets stripped out. The why disappears from the request. And without the why, without the connection back to purpose, the purpose of creating that extraordinary guest experience, well, those requests become transactional. So the favour bank between departments starts moving into high debt. And that can build quiet resentment underneath the surface of professional courtesy. Now, the teams at Gleneagles were finding themselves drifting below the line, not because the purpose had gone, but because they'd lost the language to stay connected to it under pressure. Now, we introduced a simple framework for making requests as part of the program. So it was about including the why, about naming the emotional state, bringing the human back into the demand. But one inspired member of the front desk team, one of our heroes for this Spirit of Gleneagles strategy rollout, without being asked, they went and had this framework printed and placed on every single phone in the hotel. And the conversations just changed entirely because teams calling ahead started calling ahead with excitement about a particular guest visit, sharing a moment that had moved them, making requests that carried the emotional intelligence of why it mattered. And the emotions stopped being about, I'm frustrated with this, but it became about real inspiration. So the favour bank stopped running dry all through a communication framework, not because the requests got fewer, but because the context came back. when every request carried the emotional intelligence of why it mattered, when people could see the world through each other's eyes, the trust between departments grew. They weren't coordinating tasks anymore. They were serving a shared purpose together. And the spirit that had been quietly fading away in the background came vibrantly back to life. The exhaustion signal is telling you something specific. Your people are still holding onto the old branch while reaching for the new one. And as long as they are holding both, as long as they don't feel safe enough to let go, they will keep splitting their energy between two worlds. Energy efficiency comes from channeling energy clearly toward what we're starting, away from what we're stopping, and with clarity about what we are continuing. So parts of the new tree that are still connected to the old way of doing things. When people reconnect together around a shared purpose, the campfires, the shared milestones, the common ground, everything that you've built, well, the obstacles that felt overwhelming start to look navigable because we understand why we're trying to overcome them in the first place. The question isn't, well, why is my team exhausted? The question is, what's the exhaustion telling me? And what do I need to do to make things safe for my team to let go? At the Hive, reading the exhaustion signal is part of how we work at every stage of the rollout. When spoons are starting to run low and that drama triangle is ticking away beneath the surface of every interaction, pushing harder on execution accelerates the burnout rather than resolving it. So we read the system, we facilitate the conversations that restore collective emotional intelligence, we model above the line behavior alongside the senior team, and we reconnect people to the shared purpose and milestones that make those obstacles look navigable rather than threatening. In the storm process, the reframe phase returns people to common ground, that shared purpose, that shared target, that shared milestones. That common ground is what makes the next phase of execution possible. And it's how we help people work together better to deliver results that matter again and again. So here's what you can do this week. First, I want you to give your team clarity on what they're letting go of. So you can do this through running a simple exercise, 3 columns on a whiteboard. Stop, start, continue. Stop. What are we no longer doing? Name it explicitly. Let go of the old branch out loud. This is no longer part of what we do. Start. What are we now committing to? Name the new branch clearly enough that people can grab hold of it with both hands. And continue. What carries forward? The expertise, the relationships, the practices, they're all still part of the tree where we're heading. This makes the transition concrete. It gives people permission to let go, which is the specific thing that converts that dual burden back into a focused capacity. Second, model above the line communication yourself. Now there's a 1-page download below this video with the full framework. The next time you are tempted to fire off a frustrated email or pick up the phone to tell someone exactly what you think, stop and write it out first using this structure. I noticed, I felt, because, can we, so that. All right? I noticed. So this is the specific observable situation, what actually happened, a behavior that you saw, something that occurred that made you think, hang on, I need to intervene here. What did you notice? I felt. Now, quick clue, I felt means that the next word is going to be a feeling, not a judgment. This is your honest emotional response. An actual emotion. I felt frustrated, I felt concerned, I felt overwhelmed, I felt inspired. Whatever that feeling is, name it there. Just needs 1 or 2 words. Because. Now explain why that feeling came up for you. And you get bonus points here as a leader if you can connect it to why What we're trying to do matters. Connect it to your shared purpose and what's at stake. Can we? This is the collaborative invitation. This is a question that opens a conversation rather than closes the door. And finally, so that. This is a shared outcome that you're both working towards. Now, you run that statement that you just created through 3 gates before you send. Now, this is the classic 3 gates that have been around for, well, time immemorial. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Now, if it fails any gate, you've got to go back, you've got to rewrite, and you've got to check again. And only when it passes all 3 do you hit send. Now, a word of warning, this framework can be weaponized, so make sure that you're not becoming a villain here. I noticed that you said something stupid in that meeting, and I felt that you were an idiot because I can always rely on you to say something stupid. That is not the effective use of this framework. That's the drama triangle dressed up in 5 lines. And notice there's no actual feeling in that statement either. I felt that you were an idiot. That's a judgment, right? I need you to put a real emotion after the words I felt, or the framework simply doesn't work because you're not giving any new emotional intelligence to the situation. So when you name a real emotion and you explain why you're feeling it, what's wonderful is you process your vulnerability before you voice it. So you give the other person the intelligence they need to regulate their own response, something they can work with rather than defend against. These 5 lines, they're so packed full of psychology. All I can do is recommend that you put this into practice. So a few examples of how it looks like when it works. I noticed that the product specs that we agreed on Tuesday had changed by Thursday without any communication to my team. And I felt frustrated by that because we'd already briefed 3 clients on the original timeline, and I'm now in an awkward position with them. Can we agree a protocol for how spec changes get communicated across the teams so that we can all stay aligned and protect the client relationships that we're both trying to build? True? Check. Necessary? Check. Kind? Yes. So send it. I noticed that you've missed the last 2 cross-functional check-ins. I felt concerned about that because those sessions are where the team is building the trust our whole rollout depends on. And your perspective is genuinely important to that. Can we find 15 minutes this week to talk about what's getting in the way so that we can make sure that you're set up to contribute in the way that I know that you want to? True? Yes. Necessary? Yes. Kind? Yes. Send it. The next time you're about to fire off a frustrated email or pick up the phone to vent, stop, write it out, check it through those 3 gates. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? So it gives you 5 lines. I noticed, I felt, because, can we, so that. 3 questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? That's the entire tool, modeled consistently by leadership first, i.e. that's you. It changes the entire emotional temperature of a team. And it does that more effectively than any culture program ever will. Because it's you bringing that mindset of being above the line to life in the most difficult and challenging conversation. So download the 1-page guide now and use it this week. So 3 things to take away from this episode. First, the exhaustion signal is your team running out of spoons. It's not out of commitment, it's not out of capacity. The dual burden of holding a branch while reaching for a new one, compounded by a sustained decline in collective emotional intelligence, depletes the very resource that your strategy depends on at the moment it needs it most. Second, depleted spoons pull teams below the line. The drama triangle runs quietly beneath professional behavior. Villains, victims, heroes. 3 roles that feel justified and drain trust simultaneously. A team caught in drama cannot coordinate across the silos. And that lack of trust across silos, across departments, is why strategy execution fails. It's that 9% we need to get a hold on. Third, you are the environment. Supervisor support is the proven moderator between change pressure and burnout. Your job is to create the conditions where collective EQ can operate. Model above the line behavior. Give your team the language to name what's real and reconnect them to the shared purpose, especially when the obstacles feel bigger than the vision. The question isn't, why is my team exhausted? The question is, what is the exhaustion telling me, and what do I need to make safe for them to let go of? If you're not convinced that your team is ready for your strategy rollout, if you're still holding onto one branch and not quite ready to grab hold of the new one, then you need to do your strategy rollout readiness report. This is a 2-minute questionnaire that you can find at thehive.zone/ready. And if you fill that out, you'll get an AI-generated report which will give you a clear sense of where your strategy rollout is most at risk, and it will give us a framework to talk through on a free call with me as we figure out how we can best support your strategy rollout and ensure that you can get the results that you need. It's a 2-minute thing. Just fill it in now. Go for it. Once you've read the exhaustion signal clearly, once you've restored enough collective emotional intelligence to keep the team above the line, well, a 5th question emerges. The team's moving, the behaviors are changing, the above-the-line conversations are starting to happen, and from above, the pressure is building. Where are the results? In episode 5, the crunch point, I'll show you why the moment leaders most want to double back is the exact moment that the team most needs them to double down, and what to do when the metrics that you're using to judge progress are measuring the wrong things entirely. From doubling back to doubling down, that's your next leadership journey with the Hive.